What if the one warning everyone gave you was the only thing that could have saved your life? What if every whisper in your new house wasn't just sound, but something trying to pull you into a world where reality bends and sanity shatters? This is exactly what Ethan Miller didn't expect when he moved into a cheap old rental, sitting alone at the end of a dead-end street. The price was a steal almost too good to be true. He'd soon find out why. The neighbors stared at him with a fear they tried to disguise as politeness. Their smiles were tight, their waves were rushed. The landlord, Mr. Grayson, a man who looked like he carried the weight of the world on his slumped shoulders, barely managed small talk. Before handing over the keys, he gave Ethan the one warning delivered like a funeral message. Don't listen to the whispers. Just ignore them, Ethan chuckled, thinking it was some local joke about old houses. But Mr. Grayson didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He just hurried away, practically jogging back to his car as if he couldn't get far enough, fast enough. That first night, the house felt wrong. It wasn't just the creaks and groans of old wood settling. The silence was too heavy, too thick, like the very walls were holding their breath, waiting. As Ethan lay in bed, trying to convince himself he'd made the right choice, a faint whisper slithered from somewhere behind the drywall. It was soft, almost inaudible. He blamed the old pipes, the wind, anything rational, but the whisper grew sharper, closer. It was too intentional to be anything mechanical. He snapped on the lamp by his bed. The sound vanished, instantly. He held his breath, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the old refrigerator downstairs. He switched the lamp off. Darkness flooded the room, and with it the whisper resumed. Louder this time, lower, it had a texture, a raspy quality that made the hairs on his arms stand up. Then it spoke his name. Ethan. The sound was stretched thin, like rotting breath being forced through a narrow opening. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat. He lunged for the light switch on the wall, flooding the room with a harsh yellow glare. Again, silence. He searched the room, his heart pounding against his ribs. Nothing moved. Nothing was out of place, yet the voice had felt like it was inches from his ear. He spent the rest of the night huddled under the covers, the lamp burning, shaking until dawn painted the windows in pale, merciful light. The next day, the neighbors avoided him completely. One woman, who was watering her wilting flowers, shut her front door the moment he stepped outside and mentioned living in the house at the end of the street. Their fear wasn't polite anymore. It was blatant. He felt like a leper, marked by the house he now called home. That second night, Ethan was prepared, or so he thought. He kept every light in the house on, creating a fortress of brightness against the encroaching dark. He put on music, trying to drown out the oppressive silence. But exhaustion is a patient enemy. Sleep eventually dragged him under, his head slumping onto the sofa in the living room. The whispers didn't wait. The moment darkness reclaimed the house, a power flicker, just for a second, was all it took. They returned. This time, it wasn't one voice. It was a chorus. Multiple voices, overlapping, chanting in a language he didn't recognize but understood on a primal level. The sounds were everywhere, circling him in the blackness, weaving a net of auditory terror. They were in the walls, under the floor, in the very air he was breathing. Desperate for proof, for some anchor to reality, Ethan fumbled for his phone. With trembling hands, he started a voice recording, holding the device up to the empty, dark room. The whispers swirled around him, a cacophony of dread. He let it record for a full minute before his nerve broke. He slammed on the lights, the familiar silence crashing back in. He sat there, breathing heavily, his finger hovering over the play button. He needed to know. He needed proof that he wasn't going crazy. He pressed play. Icy dread crushed him, squeezing the air from his lungs. The recording wasn't what he had heard. The voices on his phone were crystal clear, speaking perfect English. They were distinct. "Don't leave the room," one hissed. "Don't turn around," another crooned. A third, a child's voice, giggled and said, "We see you." He dropped the phone. It clattered on the hardwood floor. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. "It's not real," Ethan whispered to himself, a mantra against the encroaching madness. And then, from the darkness of the hallway just beyond the living room archway, a voice answered him. It was perfectly timed, perfectly aware, a calm and measured response to his desperate plea. Yes, we are. In that moment, Ethan understood the chilling truth. This house wasn't just old. It wasn't just haunted in the way ghost stories describe. It was something else. It was an entity. It was aware. It was waiting for him, whispering to him, and pulling him into something he was never, ever meant to hear. The warning from Mr. Grayson wasn't a superstition. It was a survival guide. A guide he had failed to follow. The following days were a blur of sleeplessness and terror. The whispers became bolder. They weren't just at night anymore. They would call his name from another room when he was home alone, a soft Ethan from the kitchen while he was in the shower. A sigh from the attic when he was watching TV. They were learning him, testing his boundaries. He tried to fight back. He bought noise-canceling headphones, but he could still feel the vibrations of the whispers in his bones. He played loud music, but they would weave themselves into the melody, twisting familiar songs into nightmarish dirges. He even tried talking back, screaming into the empty rooms to be left alone. The only response was mocking laughter that seemed to come from inside his own head. One afternoon, driven by a sliver of desperate courage, he decided to find the source. The whispers seemed strongest near a particular wall in the master bedroom, a wall that was oddly blank and cold to the touch. He grabbed a hammer from his toolbox, his hands slick with sweat. He hesitated for a second, the landlord's warning echoing in his mind. Ignore them, but it was too late for that. He had listened. And now, he had to know what was listening back. He swung the hammer. The drywall crumbled, releasing a puff of ancient dust and a smell like damp earth and decay. He tore away the plasterboard, revealing the dark, hollow space behind it. There were no pipes, no strange wiring. There was just darkness, and from that darkness, the whispers poured out, no longer faint but a roaring tide of voices. You found us, they sang in unison. You listened. From the black void behind the wall, something began to shift. It wasn't a monster, not a ghost in a sheet. It was a distortion in the space itself. A patch of darkness that was blacker than black, a place where light bent and died. And from the center of this void, a shape began to form, a silhouette of a person made of pure shadow and filled with the static of 1,000 whispering voices. It reached out a hand, not made of flesh and bone, but of concentrated sound and malice. Ethan was paralyzed, not by fear, but by a horrifying sense of recognition. He had heard these whispers his whole life. The faint, nagging doubts in the back of his mind, the little voice that told him he would fail. The echoes of his worst fears. This house hadn't created the whispers. It had just given them a mouth. It had given them a home. As the shadow hand reached for him, Ethan finally understood. You can't run from the whispers because you carry them inside you. The house was just an amplifier, an open door, and he had just kicked it wide open. The last thing he heard wasn't a whisper. It was his own voice joining the chorus, welcoming him home. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe check behind your own walls. You never know who might be listening. Ethan barely made it through the next morning. He moved like a ghost through his own life, his mind replaying the whispers from the recording over and over again, until the words were practically carved into his memory. He tried so hard to convince himself it was just some weird audio glitch, a creepy coincidence. But deep down he knew. He knew nothing about this house felt natural. Every single hallway held this strange, biting coldness, and every room felt like it was shifting slightly, just out of the corner of his eye, the second he wasn't looking. By noon, he just couldn't take it anymore. The walls felt like they were breathing in and out, closing in on him. He had to get outside. He stepped out into the daylight, hoping the sun would calm his nerves, but even the street felt wrong. It was too quiet, eerily still, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, just waiting for something to happen. He started walking toward the corner store, just trying to clear his head. As he passed the neighbor's house, an older man watering his lawn glanced up at him and just froze. The hose slipped right out of his hand, water pouring all over his shoes, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "You're in Grayson's house," the man said, and his voice was hollow, empty. Ethan forced a small nervous laugh. "Yeah, I just moved in." The man just shook his head slowly, this strange mix of pity and absolute fear on his face. "People don't stay there," he said. "They don't last." Before Ethan could even ask what he meant, the man was backing away, practically scrambling back into his house and slamming the door shut. Ethan walked away, feeling more uneasy than ever, and tried to push the weird conversation out of his mind. But that feeling of dread, it followed him all the way home, sticking to him like a shadow. When he stepped back inside, the air was instantly colder, way colder than it should have been in the middle of a sunny day. And the silence. It was thicker now, heavier than it had been before. He was determined not to let fear win. He marched through the house, opening every single window, letting the sunlight pour into the rooms. But the light didn't help. It didn't chase away the cold, and that's when he saw it. In the far corner of the living room, a small patch of wallpaper was slightly peeled back. It was fluttering, just a little, even though the air in the room was completely still. Curiosity got the better of him. He stepped closer, his heart thumping, and gently pulled the loose piece of paper back. Behind it wasn't plaster or wood. It was dark. So dark it didn't look like a shadow. It looked like an actual void, a hollow space behind the wall that seemed to swallow the light instead of reflecting it. He leaned in a little closer, and a sudden whisper slipped out of the darkness, sharp and way too clear. "Closer." Ethan stumbled back, his heart racing, and the wallpaper just fell back into place, sealing the darkness away as if it had never been there. He backed out of the room, fumbled for his keys, and left the house again. He needed space. He needed answers. He drove straight to the town library, hoping to find something, anything about the house's history. The librarian, a tired-looking woman with silver hair, stiffened the moment he mentioned the address. She didn't say anything, just turned to her computer and started pulling up old local newspaper articles. Each one was older and more unsettling than the last. People who lived at that address reported voices in the walls, moving shadows, and a feeling of distorted reality. Some tenants claimed their own reflections started whispering back to them from mirrors. Others swore the house physically changed its shape at night. But the most disturbing reports were the disappearances. 3 tenants over the last 15 years, all vanished without a single trace. The police found no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no rational explanation for where they went. The last person to disappear was a man named Matthew Porter. Age 24, Ethan froze. Matthew was the same age he was right now. The librarian hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward. "Some people don't believe the house is haunted," she whispered, lowering her voice. "They think it's feeding." Ethan's mouth went dry. "Feeding? On what?" The librarian's eyes were trembling. "Fear," she said. "Attention. The more someone listens to it, the louder it gets. The louder it gets, the more it controls them, and once it has your attention completely, no one knows what happens next." Ethan tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it as some local ghost story, but the look on her face wasn't superstition. She looked genuinely afraid for him. He left the library with a cold dread crawling through his stomach. The sun was already starting to sink, painting the sky in these unsettling shades of orange and red. When he finally got back home, the house felt different. It felt eager, as if it sensed that he knew the truth now. The moment he stepped inside, the floorboards creaked in strange patterns, almost like footsteps following him. The shadows in the corners of the rooms stretched a little too long, a little too dark. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a faint low hum, like a breath being held just inside the walls. Ethan flipped on every single light in the house, refusing to give the darkness an inch. But as night fell completely, something changed. The whispers didn't wait for the lights to go off this time. They began softly, like faint breaths in the distance. Then they grew clearer, sharper, more desperate. "We see you, Ethan. Why did you leave? Come back to the walls." He froze in the middle of the living room. The whispers weren't just in the bedroom anymore. They were everywhere. They were circling him, crawling up from the floor, slipping from behind every piece of furniture, seeping out of every single shadow in the brightly lit room, and for the first time, they sounded hungry. Ethan stood frozen in the center of the living room, a statue carved from fear. The whispers started subtly, like wind through a keyhole, but they quickly multiplied, tightening around him like an invisible noose. They were everywhere and nowhere at once, circling, overlapping, echoing from impossible angles until he couldn't tell if they were behind him, beside him, or screaming from right inside his skull. The air grew heavy, charged with a strange electricity, so thick and vibrating it felt like the entire house was taking a deep, ragged breath. Every instinct, every primal urge in his body screamed at him to run, to get out. But his feet were bolted to the floorboards, paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt ancient. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that made his vision pulse at the edges. Above him, the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. But the brief plunge into darkness had changed something. The shadows on the walls didn't return to their normal shapes. They stretched unnaturally, elongating toward the ceiling, twisting like thin, dark fingers reaching for him. He finally broke free, stumbling backward, his hand fumbling for the phone in his pocket. And then a voice cut through the distortion. It was faint, distant, but unmistakably clear. It wasn't the operator. It whispered his name. Ethan. Each syllable was drawn out, slow and deliberate, as if it were savoring the taste of the word. Ethan dropped the phone. It hit the hardwood floor with a sickening crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of glass. The whispers from the device didn't stop. They continued from the broken speaker, a faint, chilling murmur long after the call had died. Desperation took over. He scrambled for the front door, his hands clumsy as he fumbled with the deadbolt. He yanked the door open and stumbled onto the porch, gasping for fresh air. But the world outside wasn't right. The street was empty, unnaturally still. The familiar hum of the city was gone, replaced by a profound silence that was more terrifying than any noise. The colors seemed muted, as if the life had been drained from the scene, leaving behind a faded, desolate photograph. He blinked hard, trying to clear his vision. His breath fogged in the air, a white plume in the warm night. It didn't make sense. He took a single, hesitant step off the porch, and behind him, the shadows inside the house shifted violently. The front door slammed shut with a deafening boom. Ethan jumped back, his heart leaping into his throat. He grabbed the handle, twisting and pulling with all his might, but it wouldn't budge. Nothing. He kicked again, harder and again, channeling all his fear and adrenaline into the blows. On the third kick, the door flew open so violently it slammed against the interior wall and bounced halfway shut. He didn't hesitate. Ethan sprinted into the night, running blindly down the unnaturally quiet street. His lungs burned, his legs shook, but he didn't dare stop, not until the familiar, comforting glow of the gas station at the main road came into view. The normal world hit him like a wave, the hum of car engines, the bright fluorescent lights, the muffled sound of a radio, the sight of people, life. He collapsed against the cool glass of the storefront, gasping for air, his body trembling uncontrollably. A young cashier hurried out, his face a mask of concern and confusion. "Whoa, man, are you okay?" Ethan tried to explain, the words tumbling over each other in a frantic, incoherent mess. He talked about the whispers, the moving shadows, the phone call, the door. As he spoke, he watched the color drain from the cashier's face, his concern turning into wide-eyed alarm. "Dude, you need to call someone," the kid whispered, taking a step back. "You look like you've seen a ghost." A bitter, hysterical laugh almost escaped Ethan's lips. A ghost? A ghost would have been a blessing compared to whatever lived in that house. He borrowed the store's landline, his hands still shaking as he dialed the police again. This time, the call went through. The connection was clear, the dispatcher's voice calm and professional. It was the most comforting sound he had ever heard. An officer arrived 10 minutes later, a woman with a calm demeanor who introduced herself as Officer Ramirez. Ethan spilled everything, the entire nightmarish sequence of events, the disembodied voices, the sentient shadows, the house locking him inside. He knew how it sounded. He watched as skepticism began to brew behind her concerned expression, but to her credit, she listened patiently. "Okay," she said when he finished. "Let's go take a look." The drive back was the longest of his life. With every block, his stomach twisted into a tighter knot. From a distance, the house looked normal, just a dark shape against the night sky. But as they pulled into the driveway, he saw it. The subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of the roofline that wasn't there before. The way the curtains in the living room window seemed to sway, even though the windows were closed tight. And the faint, oppressive darkness pressing against the glass, as if something was standing just inside, watching them approach. Officer Ramirez got out of the car, her hand resting on her service weapon. She walked up the porch steps, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Stay close," she told him. The last thing he wanted to do was go back inside, but he couldn't let her go in alone. The moment he crossed the threshold, the coldness slammed into him again, a physical force that stole his breath. The lights in the entryway flickered just as they had before. Officer Ramirez swept her flashlight down the hallway and into the living room. "Looks old, yeah, but nothing crazy." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but a new whisper slid through the air. It was low, almost playful, and it was meant only for him. "Welcome back." He froze, every muscle in his body tensing. Officer Ramirez noticed immediately. "What? What is it?" She swung her flashlight back toward the living room, and for a split second, the beam seemed to flicker and distort, as if it were hitting a patch of static in the air. On the far wall, the shadows shifted, not from the movement of the light. They moved on their own, pulsing, breathing. Ramirez took a step forward, her professional calm replaced by a new tension. "Is someone in here?" she called out, her voice firm and authoritative. "This is the police." There was no answer. Only a faint, dry rustle from somewhere deeper in the house. She unholstered her weapon. "Stay behind me," she ordered, her voice low. They moved cautiously through the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. The whispers grew bolder, no longer trying to hide. They came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. "Closer, stay, join us." Officer Ramirez spun around, her weapon raised. "Who's talking? Come out where I can see you." Her voice echoed through the silent house, but the reply that came back wasn't from a single source. It came from all around them, a deep, layered whisper, like 100 mouths speaking at once. "We are here," Ramirez stumbled back, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. What the hell was that? Before Ethan could answer, the hallway behind them began to stretch. The walls bowed outward, the floor and ceiling elongating like taffy, warping into impossible, nauseating shapes. The laws of physics were breaking right in front of them. Officer Ramirez grabbed Ethan's arm, her grip like a vice. "We're leaving now." They turned and ran for the front door, their footsteps echoing in the distorted space. But as they reached it, the door slammed shut with a force that shook the entire frame. The lock clicked shut on its own. And then another click from the kitchen door, and another from the back porch. One by one, every lock in the house engaged, a symphony of metallic clicks sealing them inside, as the whispers rose from a murmur into a deafening, triumphant chorus. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears as every lock in the house clicked shut, one by one. The sounds were like a trap snapping closed, sealing him and Officer Ramirez inside. A rising chorus of whispers swelled through the walls, a living storm that grew louder and louder. The air grew so cold he could see his own breath, a pale cloud in the dim light, even as his skin burned with a feverish panic. The walls themselves seemed to tremble, as if something enormous and ancient was crawling just beneath the surface. Officer Ramirez raised her gun, her hands shaking as she aimed it down the hallway. The passage ahead seemed to pulse with expanding shadows, twisting and breathing. "Ethan, stay behind me," she whispered, but her voice was thin, betraying the fear she was trying to hide. It didn't matter. The house no longer cared where they stood. This was its territory, its body, and they were trapped inside it, like prey caught in the belly of a beast. The lights flickered violently, once, twice, then shut off completely. They were plunged into a darkness so thick it felt like it had weight pressing down on them from all sides. Ethan instinctively grabbed Ramirez's arm, a silent plea for reassurance. But before he could speak, a whisper deeper and more guttural than any before rumbled from the floor itself. "Don't look." The vibration traveled up through their bones, a chilling, resonant command. A second voice followed, slightly higher, scraping across the air. "Don't run." Then a third, layered with countless others, hissed from the ceiling above them. "You belong to us now." Ramirez's flashlight clicked on, its beam weak, barely cutting through the oppressive blackness. When she pointed it down the hall, Ethan's entire body seized up in terror. The hallway was wrong. It was longer, much longer than it should be, stretching into a twisting void that bent left, then right, then downward at an impossible, nauseating angle. It was like a tunnel folding into itself, defying all logic and physics, and moving within it. Something was there. A figure, dark and tall, its limbs unnaturally thin, its outline flickering like a corrupted digital image, as if it existed between the frames of reality. In a moment of pure reflex, Ramirez fired a shot. The bullet vanished into the darkness, making no sound, hitting nothing solid. The creature, or whatever it was, didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned forward, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. A slow, deliberate whisper leaked from it, a sound that carried a twisted familiarity, like a human voice stretched and warped into something inhuman. "Matthew said hello?" Ethan froze. The name hit him like a physical blow. Matthew Porter. The last man who disappeared from this town. The man who lived in this house before him. Ramirez grabbed Ethan's wrist, her grip like iron. "We're finding another exit. Now." They ran blindly, stumbling into the kitchen and yanked at the back door. But just like the front, it refused to budge, sealed shut by an unseen force. The window beside it had no latch, just smooth, solid glass. Ramirez struck it with the butt of her gun, but instead of shattering, the glass rippled outward like liquid, the impact sending waves across its surface. Ethan stumbled back in horror as the window hardened again, completely smooth and unbroken. The house was alive, shifting and sealing every escape route, tightening its grip. Then they heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, heavy footsteps echoed from the floor above them. In the attic, Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Someone or something was walking right over their heads. The footsteps split into two sets, moving in perfect unison, then three, then dozens. It sounded like an army of invisible figures, pacing the upper floor with a terrifying rhythmic purpose. Ramirez aimed the flashlight upward. The ceiling looked normal, but for one thing, tiny flakes of paint had begun to drift down, like fine dust shaken loose by something heavy crawling directly overhead. "Ethan," Ramirez whispered, her voice barely audible, "whatever's here, it's surrounding us." The whispers surged again, louder now, clearer, the words overlapping and slamming into their minds like commands. "Join us, fall with us. Give yourself to the walls." Ethan felt something cold brush the back of his neck. He spun around, nothing was there. But the cold touch remained, sliding slowly down his skin like icy fingers tracing his spine. Ramirez fired again, this time toward the living room. The muzzle flash lit up the entire space for a split second, and in that flash of light, Ethan saw them. Dozens of silhouettes were pressed against the wallpaper, their forms visible from the inside, their faces stretched into masks of agony, their mouths open in silent screams. The wallpaper pulsed with their movements, like a thin layer of skin stretched too tight over a writhing mass. Ramirez grabbed Ethan's face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. We are not dying in this damn house. Do you hear me? Ethan could only nod, his body trembling uncontrollably. She pulled him toward a door he hadn't noticed before. The basement door. Old houses sometimes have storm exits. Those might not be sealed yet. The basement stairs groaned under their weight as they descended, the flashlight beam scraping across dusty walls and forgotten shelves. The whispers didn't follow them down, not at first. The silence was somehow worse. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the cold concrete. Ramirez shined the light into the far corner, and there it was, a rusted metal hatch, half covered with debris. A possible escape. A sliver of hope surged through Ethan's chest. But the moment they reached it, the basement door slammed shut above them. BOOM. The sound was deafening, final. And then the house began to whisper again, louder than ever before, shaking the very foundation. You cannot leave. We have waited. Fall into us. Ethan and Ramirez threw their weight against the hatch, yanking and pulling. Metal squealed, rust cracking under the strain. It lifted, but only a few inches. They shoved harder, desperation giving them strength, creating just enough of a gap for a person to squeeze through. Ramirez turned her flashlight back toward the staircase and she froze. Ethan followed her gaze, and ice flooded his veins. The shadows on the stairs were descending. One step at a time, slowly, patiently. A dozen dark figures, their limbs bending the wrong way, their heads tilted at broken angles, were coming down. They whispered in distorted voices that echoed as if they were speaking through water. Ramirez shoved Ethan hard toward the hatch. Go, now! Ethan squeezed through the narrow opening, scraping his shoulders, tearing his shirt, clawing his way toward the thin sliver of cool night air. Behind him, Ramirez screamed, not in fear, but in rage, a primal cry of defiance as she fought something Ethan couldn't see. He reached back for her, his fingers searching in the dark. Ramirez, come on! The moment their fingers touched, the hatch slammed shut, nearly crushing his hand. Ramirez's screams cut off instantly. The whispers stopped. Everything went silent. Ethan lay stunned in the cold dirt outside, staring at the sealed hatch, his body trembling uncontrollably. The realization sank in, cold and absolute. The house didn't want him anymore.